Yeah, hi. Monica Bryan, she, her. Yeah, I get the honor of introducing Maggie Lorenz, who I've known for a long time. And I actually get to call her one of my Urban Bird Collective leaders. So she's one of 40 folks that we have at the Urban Bird Collective. And we, the Urban Bird Collective, have been in partnership with, before it was Lower Failing Creek, but now Wakaŋ Tipi, Awaŋyaŋkapi. We've had the pleasure of doing bird surveys there. Some of our most enjoyable walks are the Pride Walk there and then the winter bird storytelling. So we just spend a lot of time at that in that space, the Bruce Vento space, and really appreciate the work that Maggie has been doing, guiding all of the things that are happening there, and you're going to hear about it. And so Maggie is from Turtle Mountain, Spirit Lake, enrolled there, and again, executive director at Wakaŋ Tipi, Awaŋyaŋkapi. So Maggie, I'm going to hand it over to you, and yeah. Thank you for all you do.
Well, thanks, Monica. Yeah, my name is Maggie Lorenz, as Monica said. Thanks, Monica, and everybody at the St. Paul Bird Alliance for thinking of inviting our organization and extending this invite to share a little bit about our work and the things that we're up to on the east side in St. Paul. Um, like Monica said, I'm an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Ojibwe, and I'm from North Dakota, also from Spirit Lake Nation in North Dakota, but I was born and raised here in the Twin Cities. Um, and I've been working with Wakaŋ Tipi Awaŋyaŋkapi since 2019 when it still was Lower Failing Creek Project. Um, but I can get a little bit more into the history of the organization, and the history of our work here in my presentation. So I think I'll just get started. Um, so the title of the presentation tonight is Restoring Honor, Connection, and Land on the East Side, which is just a general overview of what we do at the organization. And we'll talk about the different ways in which we do that tonight. But to get started and to really like center ourselves, I really wanted to start off with this kind of conversation or this slide to really talk about how Minnesota is a Dakota place. Dakota people have named this landscape and left our marks here on the landscape and in the history. This is a quote from a dear elder, Gwen Westerman, who was a co-author of the book Minnesota Makoche. An amazing book about the history of Minnesota from a Dakota perspective. If you haven't read it, highly recommend that you do. Where we're at right now is in this red circle in the Twin Cities. And this map is a rendering from the 1980s from a man named Paul Durand, who worked really closely with the Dakota and Native communities in Minnesota to try to capture and map some of the Dakota and Indigenous place names before they were kind of forgotten to history. Um, Even by the early 1980s, a lot of these place names were not held in oral tradition or were forgotten by some of the elders, which is why he wanted to do this project. So this is a really hard map to look at and try to see all of those little words, but all of those words are place names for all the rivers, lakes, creeks, and different landscape features that we still have in our communities and in our Twin Cities in Minnesota today, that go by other names typically, but originally had Indigenous place names. And so this is a little bit of a zoomed in kind of section right there in St. Paul, and you can kind of see in the middle there it says Wakaŋ Tipi. And that is right where the river bends there on the Mississippi River. Right below where it says, or right above rather, where it says Wakaŋ Tipi, you can see it says Iminijaskada, which means the White Bluffs. And so Iminijaska is the traditional Dakota name for the area that we know as St. Paul. There are a lot of other place names there. You can see Kapoja, which was the closest kind of village community site to the Wakaŋ Tipi sacred site. Chokantanka is what we now know as Pig's Eye or Pig's Eye Regional Park. And that in the Dakota language, Chokantanka means kind of like a big marsh, is essentially what that means. Wakaŋ Tipi means the place where the spirits dwell. Imenijaska, White Bluffs, the name for St. Paul. Gaboja was the name of the community that lived there, and that really meant the people who really pack light. A lot of reasons for that name, different interpretations or stories about why that community had that name. But one that I really like is that a long time ago, Dakota people had a tradition of going on hunts and then drying the meat, packing it, and then they would take it from their summer village to their winter village sites. So they pack and travel with all of their dried meat. And the people at Gaboja had a reputation for not really doing that. They would just hunt more regularly and not dry and pack and move so much meat when they moved village sites. So that's one of the stories about how that community got that name. And you can see there are a lot of other place names around this area, but those are just some that I wanted to highlight because that's the area that we work in at Wakaŋ Tipi, Awaŋyaŋkapi. And that name essentially means the people who take care of Wakaŋ Tipi. So that's the area we care for, and that's where our work is focused on that landscape here, which you can see late 1800s was the landscape of Gaboja. This painting was done by Seth Eastman, and I really just love the images that I'm seeing in this particular painting, but really how the landscape would have looked prior to colonization. The traditional birch, not birch bark, but the traditional elm bark lodges, those are actually elm bark. And recently we've been doing a lot of cultural revitalization work in our Dakota communities. And so down at Prairie Island Indian Community, Lower Sioux Indian Community, and then over at Shakopee, they now have started revitalizing and have built some of these traditional elm bark lodges in their communities. These canoes that you see on the river are traditional Dakota style dugout canoes, which our organization is working on a project right now. I actually just came back from the Minneapolis American Indian Center, where we are working on a project right now to carve, I guess, a traditional dugout canoe. And so these cultural revitalization projects are part of the work that we do at our organization as well. Part of this Gaboja landscape, of course, is the site where our organization takes its name from, Wakaŋ Tipi, which again means dwelling place of something sacred. Our Dakota oral history tells of the nature of the sacred beings who dwell within this cave. So we have a lot of stories and histories about the kind of godlike, I guess, water beings that live in these caves. And there were a lot of petroglyphs that were in the interior of the cave that kind of gave reference to these beings. There were a lot of ceremonies that were held in this atrium here on the interior of what is now known as Carver's Cave, but historically Wakaŋ Tipi Cave. This image here is from 1913. This was after a series of the cave being open and closed again due to natural kind of like bluff erosion and falling rocks. But the cave was opened in 1913, and this was actually a delegation of Blackfeet Native people who came through the area as they were on an actual national tour to promote Glacier National Park. And they specifically requested to stop and pray at this cave. So this is an image that was taken during their time. So this place was not only sacred to Dakota people, but to a lot of other indigenous tribes from around the region. And then on top of the bluff at Wakaŋ Tipi are the burial mounds at what is now called Indian Mounds Regional Park. At this site, there were over 35 recorded burial mounds between two eastern and western mound groups, but some estimates are much higher than that. And these mounds are dated to be at least 2,000 years old. This image here is from 1957 from the Science Museum of Minnesota, kind of showing where these mounds were on the bluff. And I apologize if you guys can hear my dog in the background. It's kind of her zoomies time of the night. She's playing with her toys. But this area up here is kind of, if you're familiar with Indian Mounds Regional Park, this is where the 6 remaining kind of intact, I guess, burial mounds are today. But there were many, many more here. And then this is the area at the kind of bottom, I guess, of the hill, if you will, down Mounds Boulevard. Right now there's a parking lot and an overlook here, which is right over some burial mounds that had been leveled for the park and ultimately the parking lot. There are a lot of burial remains still in the landscape. A lot of these mounds were either just kind of like the land was leveled, so the remains are still there. A lot of people don't know that, and that's something I think that's really important to know. And then another feature of this kind of Kaposia village area was Phelan Creek. And this creek was named for Edward Phelan, who was like an early settler to the area, made his homestead on the creek. And so that's how the creek and then ultimately the lake took his name. But this creek was navigable and used to connect Lake Phelan to the Mississippi River, emptying into the river near the entrance to Wakaŋ Tipi Cave. And the Dakota would use this waterway to travel and make their way up to the ricing beds and gather maple, do their maple sugar camps at White Bear Lake. So that was really an important waterway and part of the landscape as well. But then, after the War of 1862, the Dakota-U.S. War, this is just kind of a bit of a history here of what happened to the people at Kaposia Village, originally, which was situated on the east bank of the Mississippi below Dayton's Bluff. So again, near Wakaŋ Tipi site today. In 1837, there was a treaty which relocated the Dakota to the west bank of the river, present-day South St. Paul. And then in 1851, another treaty relocated the community along the Minnesota River near present-day St. Peter. And then, of course, the U.S.-Dakota War in 1863 ultimately exiled Dakota people from the state entirely. Many of the descendants from this particular Dakota community are mostly found at Santee, which is a tribe in Nebraska, a tribal community or reservation in Nebraska, Flandreau in South Dakota, or Prairie Island or Shakopee communities here in Minnesota. And this is just another quote from that book, Minnesota Makoche, that I thought was really important, that even though Dakota people were driven out of the state of Minnesota or exiled, many Dakota people returned. And the reason they returned is because this is where our burial sites were, our ancestors. So when it says we made our way back because our makapahas were here, that's what we call our the burial mounds. This is where our ancestors were. So again, this is just kind of talking about after the Dakota were removed from the landscape, majority of the burial mounds were destroyed to either quarry, build roads, housing, and then the park, which was ultimately established in 1893. The sacred site, Wakaŋ Tipi, was very heavily desecrated due to the development of the railroad. Much of the cave was destroyed, including the atrium where a lot of our ceremonies took place, and all of the petroglyphs that were within the cave walls were also destroyed with the railroad. And that direct connection then to the river was also severed. And then, of course, Phelan Creek was also erased from the landscape. In the 1930s, due to development, settlers and the city decided to pipe the creek underground into a storm sewer, and so the landscape of this traditional Kaposia area had been drastically changed by this point. And so as we're kind of getting into the 1900s, this was really no longer a sacred place for connection. It ultimately, the east side of St. Paul became a place for a hotbed for environmental contamination. This is kind of on the lower left-hand side. You can see the kind of difference between how the site was, the relationship to the site between people in the upper right-hand corner with Kaposia Village, and then the lower left-hand corner being a really heavily industrialized site with the railroad. Ultimately, it was around the 1970s that the rail yard stopped kind of being used for those purposes and ultimately kind of became abandoned. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it was really turned into kind of a neglected place that became a place where people would dump a lot of trash. So it became an informal city dump at that point, which is when this amazing group of people came together in 1997. That's how our organization was, when our organization was founded by East Side and Lower Town community members who really wanted to restore this area, restore these green spaces, and had a vision to restore Phelan Creek and the Phelan Creek corridor. So that first major project of the organization was this idea to reclaim and restore the site that is now we know as Wakaŋ Tipi, or we know again as Wakaŋ Tipi, but this 27-acre property that was the rail yard. A lot of community members came together, and there were a lot of different organizations that had a hand or a part in coming together to reclaim and restore this site. Trust for Public Land was a big partner in that work. What is now the organization known as the Urban Roots, which is another East Side environmental nonprofit that we work with pretty closely, very instrumental in the cleanup and the restoration efforts. The DNR, the National Park Service, and through this process, raising the funds to restore the land here at this site, the city and partners raising the money ended up getting some federal dollars, which required then a 106 review for cultural resources in order to use those federal dollars. And when that 106 review was done, that's when the leadership of this group learned more about the sacred history of the site to Dakota people and started involving the tribes. And so it was really through that tribal engagement that the landscape plan was developed for this site. There were a lot of ideas for what we could, what the community wanted to do here. I think a dog park was an idea that came up. There was another idea for like a soccer field at one point, I think, and also like condos. But ultimately, because of this 106 review, it was learned by the people developing the project that this is actually a really important cultural resource and a sacred place. Started working with the tribes, and that's how it became a nature sanctuary that it is today. So a lot of restoration work had to happen. So these are just some of the early images of the site conditions, kind of like before and after burns and native seeding. and a lot of community volunteers who came to do a lot of the planting work. The cave itself, Wakaŋ Tipi Cave, to minimize any further destruction, the tribes at the time requested that the cave be fully closed off. So there's a steel gate that kind of closes access off to the cave itself. And the kind of idea at the time with the tribes was that it would stay in place until such a time that the tribes and the organization and the city had the capacity to kind of come up with another treatment plan. But this is the plan for now, and it's been in place ever since. So if you visit the site, that steel gate is still protecting the interior of the Wakaŋ Tipi Cave. So in 2005, the nature sanctuary opened to the public, known as Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary. And these are some of the images today of the restored site. The site has 3 ponds, a couple of small creeks that kind of flow together into the ponds, and ultimately out to the river. And those ponds are all spring fed from the caves on site. So after the sanctuary was opened to the public, and the organization leadership, of course, was working really closely with the tribes, there was a lot of people who were involved in the project at the ribbon cutting and land dedication ceremony for the nature sanctuary, who thought, more people need to know about this history. This was all new to them, and they were like, people need to understand the cultural history of this place, the history of Jonathan Carver coming here, and kind of that first, I guess, really interaction between Native people and, early American explorers, I guess, in the 1700s. And that was the first meeting that happened here in St. Paul. And so people, it was like, we really want to do something about this. And so that's when the idea for Wakaŋ Tipi Center was really planted back in 2005. Since that time, the organization has gone through a lot of different ideas and visioning processes and partnerships and different ways to kind of think, how can we make this vision a reality? There was an old oil warehouse on site for a number of years. The organization worked to do a feasibility study and understand if that was a building that could be rehabbed. It was a really big building, so are there partners that we can work with? And ultimately, it was deemed that that building was not able to be rehabbed for kind of like a visitor center purpose, and so it had to be removed in 2015, which is when the city signed a development agreement with our organization to design and build this cultural and environmental interpretive center, Wakaŋ Tipi Center. And so, like I said, visioning, community and stakeholder engagement and site acquisition was really 2005 through 2015. After that point, when we entered into that public-private partnership agreement and development agreement, we kicked off our capital campaign and got our first bonding in 2018 for the project. And that's when we started pre-design and schematic design in 2019. And that's when I was hired to kind of lead this project. We went through visitor interpretive experience planning and held a land dedication ceremony. We did our exhibit planning, our site and utility work, and building redesign in 2022 and 2023. And ultimately, in 2024, we began building construction. So this year, finally, 20 years after the idea was planted, we're going to be having our grand opening for Wakaŋ Tipi Center this fall. And throughout this period of time, the organization transitioned itself to Native leadership. So that was another thing that happened as the organization started learning more about the cultural history of the site and how important this place was to Dakota people. They really wanted to see Dakota people take leadership of the project and of all of the programs at this organization. And so in 2017, the organization had a strategic goal to transition to Native leadership, which was ultimately achieved in 2022 and codified into the organization's bylaws that a majority of the board would be Native. And so this is kind of our makeup today. Six out of our, excuse me, 5 out of our 7 board members are American Indian, and 8 out of our 9 staff members are American Indian. So we've really grown a lot and ultimately made this transition to becoming Native led and Native run at the staff level as well. And the whole project to develop Wakaŋ Tipi Center was really led by Dakota people. So this is kind of a list of the people who were really instrumental in everything from working with our architects, from the design of the building, building materials, the interpretive plan, the exhibits, and even writing the content and doing the art for the exhibits that will be at the center was accomplished by this amazing group of a dozen people here. So, and they represent all different Dakota communities. That was really important to us, that we had people who were elders, people who were younger. We had people on this steering committee who were artists, authors, storytellers, cultural historic preservation officers and historians. And so we really wanted to make sure that we had like a broad perspective on the steering committee that represented a wide range of Dakota perspectives from different communities, because in our Dakota Oyate or nation, we're not a monolith. We definitely have things that are true across Dakota communities, but there are also things that different communities do differently. And so we wanted to make sure that as we were developing this center, it was going to be a place that felt like home for all Dakota people. So this was the vision and the mission that we kind of created together with that steering committee. And so, we talked about really the vision being a place of gathering and healing, where we can restore our land, our language, and lifeways, a place that is safe and secure, knowing that our traditional values and protocols are going to be implemented here. And, our elders have always told us that nothing, even through colonization, nothing that none of our cultural traditions or, our languages or things like that have been lost. They've just been, they had to be put down for a while. And there were a lot of reasons behind that, that I probably can't get fully into in an hour presentation. That's a whole other presentation, but, through a lot of different policies and initiatives of the United States government, like boarding schools, our languages and traditions were systematically taken from our people. And so even though those things were taken, they're not gone forever. They're just waiting to be picked up again. And so that's part of the vision, that we'll be able to do that here. Our mission is really to be an intergenerational gathering space that honors the Wakaŋ Tipi Cave and the Makapaha as Dakota sacred sites, and that we will connect people to this sacred landscape through immersive experiences in Dakota history, lifeways, language, and values. So these are just some of the images or renderings of the building and the landscape. We're really, really excited to have beautiful teaching gardens that will kind of surround the center and allow us to re-engage with our traditional foodways. And this is just boring for some people, but for me, I'm very excited to see all of these interior spaces where we get to program and have classroom spaces and have all of our different events, and we'll have office spaces here for our staff. One of the really exciting pieces that, as we were going through COVID and inflation and trying to raise money for this project, value engineering was always something that continued to put pressure on the project, and the teaching kitchen kept coming up as something that could be reduced, and it was just not a no-go. This is such a big piece of the project, is being able to reclaim our traditional foodways And we really needed a full service teaching kitchen to be able to do that, which we were able to save in the project. So we're really excited for all of the things that we can do here. And then these are just some of the exhibits that will be in the nature sanctuary outdoors. So we'll have these different places called teaching stones that you'll encounter as you walk the trails at the sanctuary. They'll have these little audio posts where you can hear different stories from Dakota people about various teachings or themes or values. And so we have, I believe, 8 of these teaching stone stations kind of that will be throughout the sanctuary. And we're going to be recording these stories actually next month. So very exciting. Still working on the development of these exhibits. These are just some renderings of our exhibits about the restoration of the site. More information or more renderings here of some of the garden spaces and the plant IDs that will be in the gardens. We thought it was really important that in all of our exhibits, the Dakota language came first. And so you'll see in this first kind of image here, or rendering, Hante is the Dakota word for northern white cedar. But we also wanted to be able to have the common name and the Latin name, which is very important for me and other people who are on the steering committee who are botanists, ethnobotanists. It's really important to know specifically what those plants are. So we'll have all of that information. And then these descriptions about the plant were written by people on the steering committee talking about the gifts that these plants offer. And again, this is just kind of like our building construction timeline with a grand opening here in October. We're really excited about that. And so as we're moving into Wakaŋ Tipi Center, another really big thing that we were just able to announce was our co-management agreement that we just entered into with the city of St. Paul. So this is a really huge step for our organization to be able to take care of this site and provide stewardship to the site using indigenous land management methods, which right now, prior to entering into this co-management agreement, as a kind of nonprofit partner or a volunteer organization, we were not allowed to utilize some of these indigenous land management methods on the site because of the different rules and regulations that City of St. Paul and their Parks Department has. And so this new co-management agreement will really allow us to take care of the land in a way that is traditional for us and feels and more in line with how we would take care of our lands, knowing that the land is our relative. And so, some of our work does extend, of course, beyond just Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary, because we do understand that all of these sites are connected. So we do work as well at Indian Mounds Regional Park and have projects that we're working on with the city there, as well as the Phelan Creek Corridor and Pig's Eye Regional Park. And so I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about some of the things we're doing at Indian Mounds Regional Park. For those of you who follow St. Paul Parks projects, there's been a cultural landscape study that happened a number of years ago. I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, that has really been guiding a lot of work that's happening up at that site. This all kind of was spurred into existence, this cultural landscape study, because there was a master plan for Indian Mounds Regional Park, and one of the projects in the master plan was the addition of a splash pad feature. And there were some Dakota community members who became aware of this by chance and asked if the city had consulted with the tribes about this, which they had not. And so she took it upon herself to make sure that the tribes were aware of this project. And that's when the tribes became involved, the State Historic Preservation Office became involved, and ultimately the funding that was the city was going to use to install the splash pad, they diverted those funds to fund a cultural landscape study, which revealed so much more about the site than had been documented previously by scientific knowledge. but our Indigenous community members and Dakota communities have known, which was that there are burial remains far spread all throughout that bluff site, not just in those 6 mound sites that are still visible. And so after that was found out through some ground penetrating radar and cultural landscape study that was done, it's really created a whole new kind of vision for what's going to happen with this landscape. And so at this point, the work that's being done at Indian Mounds Regional Park is really focused on kind of like messaging. So there's some new signage up at the site that talks about, you are in a cemetery. So really trying to get people to understand in the community and reimagine or re-educate themselves about what this landscape actually is. And so we have some messaging planning that we're doing. Ultimately, there's some trails that have been removed, and as features and infrastructure at this site ages, ultimately the city will remove those things and not replace them. And the ultimate goal is that the site will become a naturalized oak savanna prairie, as it historically was, to try to protect those burial remains that are still there. Another big project we're working on is the redesignation and restoration of traditional names at places of cultural significance in the city of St. Paul. So when we think about the site that we're working at Wakaŋ Tipi, which is right now named Vento Nature Sanctuary, we are having conversations with the city of St. Paul about redesignating that site from a park to a new designation that would be called cultural landscapes, with a whole new different set of policies and regulations that go with that about how the land is maintained, what kinds of recreational activities happen at cultural landscapes. And so we're working on this designation and the policies that go with it, and ultimately considering what this might look like as a renaming opportunity, or rather a restoration of a traditional place name. Finally, I think I wanted to just share a little bit about our work to restore Phelan Creek, which earlier in the presentation I talked about had been a historic waterway that was a really important part of this Kaposia village site for transportation purposes, gathering medicine, and making our way up to White Bear Lake to the rice beds. So right now, that whole creek corridor and that creek itself is buried in this storm sewer. And so our project right now is we're working on phase 1 is what we're calling it, of the project to restore Phelan Creek, which on the map on the right, you can see it says Reach 8 and Reach 7. That quarter-mile section is phase 1. So that's what we're working on restoring, is just that quarter-mile at the south end of Lake Phelan. You can kind of see what the current site conditions are here, and this rendering of what the future restored creek will look like. And so this project, we are not going to watch this video probably because I think I'm running out of time. But we have some great videos about the daylighting project on our YouTube channel. If you just search up Wakaŋ Tipi Awaŋyaŋkapi on YouTube, you could find this awesome video that we did in partnership with Hamline University's Center for Global Environmental Education, and learn more about it. But there are a lot of benefits to daylighting projects, which are happening throughout the country. And we've had a lot of local projects here in the Twin Cities as well, restoring and daylighting creeks. But there are a lot of ecological benefits, cultural and community benefits, stormwater management, and other things like that. So again, this is kind of like a high level view of what that restoration of that quarter-mile will look like. And then finally, I just wanted to touch a little bit on, outside of the Wakaŋ Tipi Center and the daylighting projects, which are really huge multi-million-dollar projects, we also offer community programs. And so some of the programs that we offer are around cultural and environmental education. So I'm highlighting here one of our events that we recently hosted with Urban Bird Collective and Monica, our winter bird walk and storytelling that we do every December. We also do restoration and stewardship events to engage community members to take care of the site. And so, what kind of these images are, we have our annual spring and fall trash pickups. We also have a lot of planting um, volunteer opportunities for people to come and plant native plants or remove invasive species throughout the kind of summer months. And then we do some cultural education around Dakota Lifeways. And so one of the event highlights I just wanted to share with you is that we have seasonal webinars called Gifts of. So the one on the left was I can't remember when this was. I think this was back in 2023. Gifts of the Plant Nation. This one was focusing on bee balm. So we really take a deep dive into one plant. And the webinar really focuses on bringing in an elder or a knowledge keeper from the community to talk about that plant or that species and from a cultural perspective. So some storytelling. And then we have one of our staff members talk about the plant as whether it has medicinal uses, food uses, utility uses amongst Dakota and Indigenous peoples and kind of share more about that. And then finally, we have our restoration manager who will talk about how this plant relative or animal relative kind of interacts with the ecosystem and what the ecological benefits are of having that plant or animal in the ecosystem. And so the most recent Gifts of program that we did was Gifts of the P'tay Oyate, which is the P'tay is the word for buffalo. Um, it's like the general term for bison, American bison. A lot of people have heard the term tatanka, which is for a bison bull. Like P'tay is the general term. So we did a recently, which was just 2 days ago, Gifts of the P'tay Oyate, and we had some really amazing speakers um, for that event to learn about all of our all of our buffalo relatives and how they have such a great impact on the landscape. So those are some of the programs we offer. This is a little bit about this is a glimpse of some of our staff and community members. So I think I'm at time, and I think we might have time for questions. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions. One had to do with a cave, and you've got let's say a steel grate in front of that. Does that still allow bats to go in there or not? Do you know?
That's a great question. I don't know, but I could find out. That's a really good question.
Okay. Next one is, and based on all the things that you've done, I think the answer is yes, but will the new center that you're putting together, is that going to be bird friendly?
Yes, so we'll have bird safe glass. And we are going to be having part of the gardens that will be surrounding the center will have an area that's specifically designated or designed for like a bird garden. So a lot of like seeds and fruit bearing plants that we know that the birds are going to be uh, drawn to.
Cool. And then there's a comment that one of our former president of the St. Paul Audubon Society, Dan McGinnis, worked on this project as well. And do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, Dan was the board chair when I first started with the organization back in 2019, and he is one of my favorite people in the world. He's like uh, he very much is like a grandfather figure in my life, and so he recently stepped off the board, but he's now a board member emeritus for the organization and still very much engaged. I just saw him a couple days ago, so. Yeah, absolutely adore Dan, and he did so much for this organization, so much for um, really the entire St. Paul and the river, the community. We actually established our annual environmental stewardship award in Dan's honor, and he was the first recipient of that back in 2022, I think it was.
Cool. Then there's some other ones and I think I'll combine the two. They're wondering if you're going to have a bio blitz or a bird survey in the coming years.
Yes, so BioBlitz is coming. I want to say we're having it in August this year, and this will be our second year doing a BioBlitz. And Monica and the Urban Bird Collective are definitely partners with that. And then, what was the other question?
So the bird surveys. So I can
Oh
jump
yeah.
in. So we've been, Urban Bird Collective has been working with Maggie, and this is probably our fifth year. So we do bird surveys every month. And then last year we changed it so that we not only do them every month, but starting in April to like the second week in June, we do them every week. Just to, we want to catch the migration that's coming through there. And so we're there year round doing bird surveys for them.
Cool. Now, I'm not exactly sure how this one is. One of the people asked, for your staff, where are the men?
That's a great question. We wish more men would apply to do work in the environment. I don't know. That's something we've definitely talked about internally about trying to get some more gender diversity on the staff. That's just kind of the way it's worked out. I guess the people who've been applying and qualified for these positions have been really, really amazing and stellar women. So, but definitely trying to work on finding some gender diversity there.
All right. And I think I'm looking now. I think that's it for questions. Uh, Greg, do you have anything else to
Yeah,
add?
well, actually, the one question that just popped up, it says, anything you've noticed through your bird surveys over the years? I don't know if you or Monica may have a kind of a general overview of those surveys and what you might have found.
So when we were just doing a monthly, we were missing a lot that was happening in migration. Like we would hear, like Maggie would tell us, oh my God, I heard the whippoorwills, or I saw these, warblers. And so that's when we decided that we wanted to do, especially during the spring migration, the bird surveys every week. I would say, like in general, like the bird counts are down. There's a big diversity there. We get, the field birds, we get tons of sparrows. Oh my gosh, the flickers when they come through in migration. We get woodcocks there, so that's always fun. And then, of course, we're always counting what's flying over. And so because we're on the river, we get herons and egrets and turkey vultures, and we're always getting a red tail, and of course the eagles are there. So tons of birds. I think we counted like 79 species this year, and we probably missed some. So I don't know if you'd add anything, Maggie.
I just know that I really like birding at the site. I can't say in terms of like historical data because we just started doing bird surveys a couple of years ago. So, I mean, we do have historical data from what's been in eBird over time, but we weren't doing any like specific bird surveys until recently. So I think that'll take a little bit of time to develop, but I really do. I've heard from a lot of people who do bird at the site that it's really it's a really great hotspot. And for being a place that's kind of a small kind of like nature sanctuary with the railroad tracks and a lot of industry around the site. There is, like Monica was saying, a lot of diversity there. So it's a great spot, especially in spring migration, especially in those little woodland trails. In the bluffs is where I found just so many cute little warblers, and I love going back there in the spring.
Monica or Maggie, you may have seen this question pop up, but what are you involved in at Pig's Eye? I know our chapter is doing things, and then I know Monica, you are, and Maggie's group, and so you guys can.
Yeah, I mean, Monica, I'll let you I'm sure you're
Okay.
probably doing more than us, but right now I think it's pretty minimal. We've been kind of keeping an eye on the East Side River District project, really from the Great River Passage Conservancy, who's leading kind of that work on the east side. So been partnering or yeah, partnering and staying in close conversation with Great River Passage Conservancy about kind of the development of concepts for the restoration or the vision there. Our environmental justice organizer has been involved with staying connected with the task force for the Superfund site and the cleanup work that's going to be happening. So just trying to keep a pulse on things, and then as there's more to do there, certainly a place that we're very interested in helping with stewardship.
Yeah, for me, I'm on the board of Great River Passage, and last year the Urban Bird Collective partnered with the Great River Passage, and so what we did was we held, I want to say like 8 events there, and really introduced 50 new people to the site. Pig's Eye, we did walks during the summer, and of course the flooding impacted some of our walks, but we did more walks in the fall. And for us, it was just really to get people there. Like, one, it's so hard to find. But then when you're there, you're like, wow, like there's again, a lot of bird diversity, and then wanting to make sure that people have a say in how this gets developed. So long-term project, but we want to get more people there and get eyes on there so that it can stay protected.
Yeah, and then I'm sure folks are aware of the work that St. Paul Bird Alliance is doing also with Kiki, and a lot of both from a advocacy perspective and getting folks down there. So it's nice to have a group of folks working on that. So I don't know, Neil, if you want to do this. I'm sorry,
I'll catch
I was
the
going to
combo.
close, and then these questions came up, so I started talking. Sorry. So
Yeah. So we've got an interesting one, kind of a twofer. One is just a general one. Have we picked a new site for the Kestrel box pole? And then the second one is, do you partner with South St. Paul to connect the Kaposia landing with Wakaŋ Tipi area and share the telling of the story?
That's great. I don't know about the Kestrel box, so I'm going to leave that for somebody else.
Yeah, I can tell so the Kestrel box was taken down just because it wasn't getting used. And it was just probably in a bad place, and especially with the development bringing in the center, it was in the middle, it was too close. So there isn't a place right now that's been identified. If anything, it might actually go to Pig's Eye, the Pig's Eye site.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then as far as partnering with South St. Paul, definitely not something that we've done, but a great idea. And so there are a lot of different ways. I think there are a lot of different places that right now that we're partnering with to kind of tell these stories and connect different sites. One of the places that we're really involved with is the development of the River Learning Center. Again, a Great River Passage Conservancy project, but really on the interpretation of that site and the history there. We're also in partnership with Awaŋyaŋkapi, also known as St. Anthony Falls, to kind of connect kind of these constellation of sacred places along the river, and connect the storytelling. But that's a really great suggestion, reaching out to South St. Paul. So they hadn't considered that, but I am now. Thank you.
Well, Maggie, I want to thank you so much. I'm hoping that the link that we have between our organizations can continue to grow. I'm so excited about the work that you're doing, and let's keep talking. Let's find out different ways that we can connect and continue to work together. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us this evening, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thanks.
Thank
Good night.
you.